These are the components I start with when I'm putting the mechanism plate back together. That spring there, that's a little bit of an odd shape. I'll watch that closely to make sure it works okay. This arm over here is bent up too sharply. That's quite like a 90-degree bend, or even more acute than that there. Normally it's more relaxed. I don't know whether that'll work well or whether it'll cause a problem. So I will start assembling these components into the shutter. I'll start with that spring, and it actually goes over this plate, over that post there. So I've got to hold a toothpick over the centre of that post so I can be confident the spring can't escape, and lift the tail of the spring up and get it behind the pin it's supposed to be sitting behind. Of course, this spring's got more tension than usual as a result of it having been improved. So this lever's under spring tension and this lever's under spring tension. Well, I don't see a problem with that. That should be fine. This spring is our return spring for the B lever. That sits over this post, and there's a recess or a cutout on that post that the spring winds back into. So it fits into a certain spot. So if I hold back this lever and move my blade actuating ring forward to open the shutter blades, that's the blade's open position. I can take the B lever, hook it behind its spring here, and get it seated in position on its post. There you go. So it's sitting on its post now. The spring is seated on the blade actuating ring on the B lever, and I've got to get the retaining screw in place with the spring. And this doesn't really want to go, but you can get it in position if you hold it carefully. Get the screw started, run that screw down. Check the B lever moves freely, it does. And then the tail of this spring has to be swung up and over and tucks back against the case at this point. I can do this so that you can see it. You lift that up, swing it over, and tucks down against the case at this point. So there's our... If we lift the the B lever here with my finger, hold it back, I can pull back the blade actuating ring. The shutter blades drop back to the closed position. That's good. Now I can just check that that screw's tight. That's fine. And I'll prepare the next pieces for putting into the shutter. While I'm here, I'm going to put a touch of molybdenum paste on that detent there, because it's easy to get to it at this stage. It becomes harder as you get deeper into the shutter. With a touch of molybdenum paste on the end of a toothpick here, I'll get it onto that detent spring and the post. Just check the action. See if let's hold back that catch. Check the action, see if it feels smooth. Oh, it does. Yeah, that's good. Hold back the B lever, return us to the rest position. There are 2 points on the blade actuating ring that couple to the main drive cam. That post there and this post directly opposite it, which is sprung loaded. I've just put some paste on there. They're good now. Right, more cleaning of pieces. What do I want to put in next? Oh, all the control gear over here. For the... what do I want to do? No, let's put these pieces in. These are their settings levers, and you can see that's very, very oily. You can probably see the colour of that. See that dark staining there? That's just loose oil. All these pieces need to be cleaned. So we'll get those clean, get all that oil and rubbish off there, and we should be in business. Where are we? There we go. So, naphtha again. This steel shim here, in some cases that may be corroded, suffering from corrosion. You certainly need to have that off. But otherwise, normally it just works well dry. If there's any hint that it's a little bit rough, you can lubricate it with a lead from a soft lead pencil. Works well. Graphite from a soft lead pencil. That'll certainly work well. It's the control lever for our diaphragm blades, making sure that's clean. This needs to be quite undistorted too. People have been swinging on the levers, trying to get a shutter that doesn't want to work. People often start swinging on all the levers and pushing and pulling on anything that looks like they can get a grip on it, and to encourage the shutter to work, and they end up bending stuff. So always be aware that the shutter may not work, not just there because of its original problem, but because it's had problems introduced by people trying to fix it by forcing something, clearing the blockage and other stupid practices. Right, that should be good. Now I'm taking some molybdenum paste again on my toothpick, and I'm going to wipe some on that detent here for the setting lever. That's the detent, rubs up against that post, and that's the little ratchet teeth right there. I'll run some on there, and this can go in place. Now the pin has to come in behind that spring there, so that the spring's acting against it. I'll pop this on a piece of wood so we can get this parked. I can take my shim. It only fits on in one place. There's a recess in here which catches that piece. And the aperture setting lever runs on there. It couples to the aperture setting ring in the camera. Why does it not want to drop in? That's better. And the 3 screws. It's always worth looking at the screws to make sure that they are relatively clean. If there's a great gob of something on them, like a thick bit of grease or something, they may cause drag. So I'll run the screws in lightly. When I've got all 3 in position, I'll check the action of that setting lever. It needs to be quite smooth. Feels quite good. I'll tighten those screws up and check it again. You can get friction with that setting ring lever sometimes, and it can be for multiple reasons. It can be friction because there's a rough spot on the aluminium casting here, so that the ring is rubbing on it. it can be that there's some distortion on this ring so that it's forced down at one point, so it's got more friction than it should have. But in this case, this moves freely, that's good. And I've got nothing on there in the way of lubricant, it needs nothing, that should behave quite nicely. It moves freely, and it means that it'll hopefully stay engaged, that the shutter speed setting ring and the aperture setting ring will stay engaged together. They won't accidentally pop apart when you're least expecting it. You need this to move freely. Some more pieces. Let's get some of this stuff clean. That's two sets of pieces here I need to get in place. These three pieces first I want to deal with. Now this is the pallet wheel and the sector gear that drives the pallet wheel, and the pallet wheel's job is to provide a delay between the time the flash contact is made and the shutter is open, because bulb flash takes this measurable time to start burning at peak brilliance. So with bulb flash, ideally you want the bulb to be burning at peak brilliance when the shutter reaches a fully open position, and so the flash needs a head start, and basically the flash sync mechanism organises that so that when you release the shutter, first it fires the flash, then it opens the shutter. On the electronic flash position it does not. The flash contact makes when the shutter blades have reached a fully open position, because electronic flashes for practical purposes require no warm-up time. The flash is at peak brilliance for practical purposes instantaneously. Instantaneously enough for our purposes anyway, because the fastest shutter speed here is a 500th of a second. And that's the effective shutter speed, the actual speed that some of the shutters probably exposed for longer than that, considerably so. Right, well, I've got my spring and I need to hook that into position. It hooks over there, stretch it out and drop it into position. Now that's cocked by the movement of the internal cocking ring when you cock the shutter, and as the shutter fires you'll see that that releases at this point, swings across here, drives that pallet wheel against the pallets here, and the delay caused by that action creates a tiny delay before the shutter itself is released. Clean up these components and get them in place. This is the flash lever, flash contact, and this lever which is the release. This controls the point at which the shutter is released. This is usually no problem unless there's oil in there. If there's oil in there or grease, anything that can cause a sticky problem, this lever may not move freely. And that usually shows by the shutter failing to cock correctly, because this lever fails to drop into position under the action of its return spring. Take those pieces away for the second. Let's get this all together over here. Right, start with this lever. Normally I just put a wipe of molybdenum paste through that and it fits over that post. You've got to be careful with this spring, you've got to pull that against the inside of the case, get the lever over the post and see that it seats. It's seated correctly in here. The flash contact, which is doing its best to hide from me. Goes on here. And if I cock this, I can get this lever in position. It's seated correctly. The smaller of the two screws goes at this end. And then we've got the return spring for this arm. And get that placed. And the spring that holds that's got a little shoulder on it. And the spring must be free to revolve around that shoulder, not trapped underneath. Just checking that's the case, that's good. The spring needs to hook into a recess at the back of this arm here, so I've got to lift that over. That spring's not the traditional shape, someone has improved it. It seems to work fine. It's always a danger when people have been in modifying the shape of springs and to affect something, some change that they believe is going to improve things. Often it means that the original parts should have worked well. They should work well in any circumstances as long as everything else is good. If people are having to improve the action of springs in order to achieve something, it usually means that there's a problem somewhere else that they're compensating for or attempting to compensate for. And instead of fixing the original problem, they're just sort of bodging it, they're trying to hide it. So always be a bit suspicious when you find parts that aren't the shape they originally were. I'll get this spring tucked down into the case there. Got to make sure this is underneath the B lever to lift it up. This is our shutter release lever. When this is cocked, you can see that the release lever here, the arm on it, lifts this lever, which swings this piece away from the main cam. And the main cam is our next cause for concern. But before I deal with that, first of all, I'm going to take my speed trains, the retard gear train and the self-timer or delay action, put them in a little jar of naphtha and get them percolating away in the ultrasonic cleaner so that they'll be clean when I come to use them.